Why Iran's future is in serious danger. Iran is arguably confronting the most severe civilizational crisis it has faced in centuries. On the geopolitical front, Iran has endured repeated setbacks in recent years in its long-running confrontation with Israel, its principal declared adversary. Militant clients that Tehran invested decades and billions of dollars to cultivate, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza and the Assad regime in Syria, have been severely weakened or dismantled, leaving Iran's homeland exposed to direct hostile strikes for the first time in decades. Following this erosion of its proxies, U.S. and Israeli aircraft have been able to strike sensitive military and nuclear facilities inside Iran with relative impunity. An American-brokered peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan also risks creating a continuous corridor of NATO-aligned Turkish influence along Iran's northern frontier in the South Caucasus, severing Iran's overland link to Russia. To the east, instability in Afghanistan under the Taliban has produced unpredictable cross-border clashes, compounded by Tehran's accusations that parts of its Afghan population colluded with Israel during the war, and by the regime's mass deportation of undocumented Afghan migrants. Yet despite these vast external pressures, the gravest threat to Iran's survival today is domestic and environmental, rather than purely geopolitical. In a short span, Iran may become one of the first major modern societies to begin truly running out of usable water for its population. Given Iran's size and its population of roughly 92 million, that is not only a national emergency, but a challenge with global ramifications. The crisis is already plainly visible in the capital, Tehran, which is both the seat of power and the country's largest city. About 10 million people live within Tehran's municipal boundaries, nearly 11% of Iran's population. Yet the city consumes roughly 1/4 of the nation's water supply. 70% of Tehran's water is normally drawn from nearby dams and reservoirs such as Arakabir, El Mlu, and Latan. By September 2025, however, all 4 principal reservoirs supplying the capital had fallen to critical, historically low levels. Tehran's average annual rainfall historically sits near 260 mm. But in 2024, the city received only around 140 mm, and preliminary figures for 2025 point to a further fall to roughly 100 mm. Under normal conditions, those reservoirs hold about 618 million cubic meters combined, yet by 2024, that volume had dropped to approximately 485 million cubic meters. By September 2025, the stored volume had fallen again to near 258 million cubic meters, roughly half of the city's reserves lost within a single year. The Latan Dam in particular, which typically stores about 95 million cubic meters, has shrunk by more than 90% and now holds only around 9 million cubic meters. Beneath Tehran, groundwater aquifers are being exhausted and collapsing after decades of over-extraction, producing accelerating land subsidence measured in millimeters per year and threatening buildings and infrastructure. In the summer of 2025, the situation deteriorated so severely that authorities shut off taps across the capital for half a day as temperatures soared above 100°F, a spike that increased air conditioning demand and contributed to power outages on top of water cuts. Months earlier, in late 2024, the government had already ordered offices, schools, and banks to close on extreme weather days to conserve electricity. Officials warned that if energy demand remained unchecked, Tehran might be forced to adopt a 4-day workweek during peak summer months to ease pressure on the grid. The state has begun rationing household water, cutting supply for 3 to 6 hours daily in many districts. In some high-rise buildings, water pressure has dropped so low it cannot reach upper floors, forcing residents to haul bottled water or fill buckets manually. The severity of the crisis in Tehran has prompted questions about the city's long-term habitability, and officials have even discussed relocating the capital to a less vulnerable location. President Masoud Pezeshkian has publicly floated moving the capital south, closer to the Persian Gulf and major trade routes. But Tehran's predicament is only one facet of a nationwide emergency. Reservoirs and lakes are shrinking across Iran, from north to south and east to west. In early October 2025, Iran's state news agency reported that 19 of the country's largest reservoirs were near complete depletion and that 3 had already reached zero capacity. More than half of Iran's dams are operating below 40% of their designed storage. Lake Urmia, once the largest lake in the region in northwestern Iran, has mostly dried up, leaving a salty, dusty plain. Over 280 cities now confront extreme water stress. For example, Yazdi's municipal supply was exhausted in March 2025, and the city relied on tanker and bottled deliveries for nearly a week until services were restored. Rural areas have suffered even worse. Hundreds of villages depend entirely on tanker trucks after wells ran dry. Across the country, cities are literally sinking as depleted aquifers collapse, and rail lines linking major urban centers are cracking under subsidence. Iranian officials have even warned of a day zero in Tehran and other cities, the moment when municipal taps could run dry for millions of people. The crisis has also become a tactical vulnerability that external actors try to exploit. In August 2025, Israel's prime minister released a video urging Iranians to rise against their leaders and offered Israeli water management expertise as part of a political appeal. Although the messenger was controversial, the underlying reality remains. Water scarcity has become one of the Islamic Republic's most acute strategic weaknesses. Shortages are inflaming ethnic and regional grievances as minority communities accuse the regime of favoring Persian-majority areas in allocations. The root causes are complex. Corruption and cronyism, flawed policies, climate change and geopolitical pressures have combined over decades to push Iran toward water bankruptcy. To trace how Iran arrived here, we must look back to mid-20th century modernization policies. In 1949, the Shah visited the United States to study large dam projects like Hoover Dam, and returned with ambitions to harness and redistribute water across Iran. U.S. technical assistance and modern drilling equipment helped expand mechanized farming and enabled widespread groundwater extraction from ancient aquifers at historically unsustainable rates. Iran's water resources are unevenly distributed. The Caspian adjacent north receives roughly 1,280 millimeters of rain annually and is lush and forested, while the central plateau and southern lowlands often get less than 100 millimeter and experience highly seasonal precipitation. Because rainfall is concentrated between October and March and can fall in short, intense storms, planners pursued dams and transfers to stabilize supplies. At the same time, the Shah located water-intensive industries, petrochemical and steel plants, on the dry central plateau near Isfahan and Fars, making those sectors dependent on diverted waters. Land reforms in the 1960s redistributed estates to smallholders and accelerated mechanized farming, but they also undermined traditional irrigation systems, qanats, that had sustainably moved groundwater for centuries. Qanats were gradually abandoned as farmers switched en masse to motorized deep wells that tapped fossil groundwater, which recharges only over millennia. The trend toward heavy groundwater use intensified after the 1979 revolution. Diplomatic rupture with the United States, economic isolation, and the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s pushed the new regime to pursue self-sufficiency in food and resources, prompting a large expansion of wells, dams, and irrigation projects. Before 1979, Iran had fewer than 80,000 wells. Within 3 years after the revolution, that number more than doubled, and hundreds more dams were planned, often concentrating on the arid Central Plateau. After the Iran-Iraq War, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was repurposed for reconstruction, spawning construction firms and state-linked water agencies that became dominant players in dam and transfer projects. A small set of intertwined engineering, design, and lobbying firms tied to the regime routinely designed projects, secured approvals, and received no-bid contracts, a system critics call a water mafia. Many of these projects proceeded without rigorous environmental studies or long-term planning, and water was diverted to IRGC-owned factories and industrial interests at the expense of farmers and cities. One large post-war project diverted the Karun River in the west to feed industrial farms, completing a mega-dam in 2011 that generated salinization problems downstream and left a saltwater reservoir harming Arab communities in Khuzestan. Although the dam caused ecological damage, insiders profited from the multi-billion-dollar contracts. By 2012, Iran had built 316 dams. By 2018, that figure more than doubled to 647. High-consumption facilities like nuclear sites and steel mills are sited on the Central Plateau for defensive reasons. But their distance from open water forces greater reliance on limited rivers and aquifers. The Zayande Rud, once a major river for Isfahan, has been reduced to a seasonal mudflat after extensive diversions for industry and agriculture, undermining Isfahan's traditional water supply. Lake Urmia's shrinkage has produced recurring dust storms that worsen respiratory illnesses and drive migration from the region. Irrigated farmland around the former lake has expanded dramatically since 1979, rising from roughly 300,000 hectares to about 700,000 hectares, increasing pressure on the watershed. But the basin can only sustainably supply roughly 4 billion cubic meters per year, whereas current irrigation needs exceed that by hundreds of millions of cubic meters. Unable to secure surface water, many farmers, sometimes illegally, drilled deep wells into aquifers, accelerating groundwater depletion. Between 2002 and 2015, registered wells rose from about 460,000 to nearly 794,000, with tens of thousands more likely unregistered. Open data analyses rank Iran among the world's fastest groundwater depleters. Of an estimated original 500 billion cubic meters of fossil groundwater, roughly 200 billion cubic meters are thought to be irretrievably lost, and much of the remainder is too saline for irrigation. Despite a roughly 50% increase in wells over 2 decades, overall groundwater extraction rates have begun to fall because the resource is simply running out. Although Iran represents about 1% of global population, it accounts for roughly 9% of global groundwater extraction. Consequently, half of Iran's aquifers are in a critically diminished state, and 6 major Iranian cities, including Tehran, rank among the world's most rapidly subsiding urban areas. To put subsidence in perspective, a global critical threshold is roughly 4 millimol per year. Many Iranian districts are sinking at rates far higher, often measured in centimeters per year, and in extreme locations reaching tens of centimeters. Tehran's groundwater table has dropped more than 12 meters in the past 2 decades, producing dangerous subsidence. Isfahan arguably faces the most severe local impacts. An estimated void of air beneath the city of some 23 billion cubic meters spans thousands of square kilometers, creating widespread ground instability. Local officials reported in September 2025 that numerous metro stations, fire junctions, mosques, libraries, hospitals, and schools are located in high subsidence zones, with dozens of schools already evacuated or condemned. Compounding physical depletion, Iran's water infrastructure is highly inefficient by global benchmarks. Roughly 90% of usable water in Iran goes to agriculture, despite agriculture contributing less than 12% of GDP. Irrigation efficiency is extremely low, around 30%, well behind neighbors such as Iraq and Turkey, where efficiencies approach 50%. Urban systems typically lose 25 to 30% of municipal supply to leakage and mismanagement, versus less than 10% in many developed cities. International sanctions have limited Iran's access to modern equipment and technologies that could have upgraded networks and reduced losses. The regime often blames sanctions for infrastructure decay. But after partial sanctions relief following the 2015 nuclear agreement, much of the additional revenue was invested in more dam projects rather than targeted reforms to conserve water. As a result of wasteful irrigation and industrial use, Iran consumes roughly twice the water per year of a comparably populated neighbor like Turkey. Per capita water availability has dropped dramatically. Estimates suggest that in 1979, Iran had roughly 4,500 cubic meters per person per year, while in the 2020s, that figure has fallen to a fraction of that level. Climate change compounds mismanagement. Iran is warming faster than many regions, and over the past 3 decades, average temperatures have risen by roughly 1.8 degrees, a rate well above the global mean. The country has endured near-continuous drought since 2020, with a roughly 30% decline in annual precipitation, reducing rivers and aquifers' capacity to replenish. Projections indicate further warming and a possible additional decline in rainfall, making long-term supply improvements far more difficult even with strong reforms. Paradoxically, Iran is both a major hydrocarbon producer and heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Renewable energy remains a tiny share of the mix while oil and gas dominate, leaving the country both a significant emitter and highly vulnerable to climate impacts. To worsen matters, upstream developments in Afghanistan have reduced cross-border flows that Iran relies on. The Hari River, originating in the Afghan mountains and forming part of the border with Turkmenistan, supplies Mashhad in Iran's northeast, a city of more than 3 million people. Since the Taliban's return to power in 2021, large dams and hydropower projects upstream have raised fears that downstream flows to Mashhad will be curtailed. Tehran has warned that filling of these Afghan reservoirs starting in 2024 has left shared downstream reservoirs at dangerously low levels. Khorasan province, where Mashhad sits, is among the driest in Iran, amplifying the impact of any upstream reductions. Unlike the Helmand River, which is governed by a 1973 treaty guaranteeing Iran a fixed annual share, the Hari has no similar modern agreement binding Afghanistan and Iran, giving Kabul de facto control over upstream decisions. The Helmand Treaty historically pledged roughly 820 million cubic meters per year to Iran, but decades of conflict and shifting politics have eroded compliance. Since 2021, Afghan dam construction along the Helmand and other rivers has reduced Iranian inflows, and officials claim deliveries have fallen far short of treaty levels. As a result, the Haman wetlands and other critical downstream ecosystems have collapsed, driving dust storms, agricultural collapse, and internal displacement. These upstream actions have heightened bilateral tension, and clashes between Iranian and Afghan forces have already occurred near shared waterways. In 2025, Tehran escalated pressure by deporting large numbers of Afghan migrants, reportedly more than 1 million within a short period, both as a political message and, officials argue, to reduce domestic demand on scarce resources. Humanitarian agencies warned such forced movements could be among the largest displacements of the decade and would further destabilize the region. All these pressures, domestic overuse, corruption, faulty infrastructure, climate change, and upstream diversions, have pushed Iran to the brink of catastrophic water insolvency. Water scarcity is also aggravating Iran's ethnic and regional fault lines. The country is a multi-ethnic state with a Persian core on the Central Plateau and sizable Azeri, Kurdish, Lur, Arab, and Baloch communities along the peripheries. Declining flows into southeastern basins feed Baloch grievances and insurgency risks, while in Khuzestan, Arab communities blame Tehran for diverting or contaminating rivers, and Lurs and Persians dispute interprovincial transfers. The drying of shared water bodies in the northwest has inflamed tensions between Kurds and Azeris, who once relied on common resources. If shortages continue to deepen, these local disputes could escalate into broader social and political unrest. So far, Tehran's response has been limited and technically ambitious, but practically constrained. The Energy Ministry has proposed a vast network of desalination plants on the Persian Gulf and Caspian Sea, linked by pipelines to inland cities like Isfahan, Kerman, and Yazd. Yet that plan would cost many billions, take years to implement, and face enormous logistical and fiscal obstacles. Corruption and weak governance raise doubts that such funds would be spent effectively. Critics fear large portions could be siphoned off before projects deliver benefits. What Iran urgently needs are domestic reforms to curb waste and over-extraction, enforceable limits on well drilling, elimination of subsidies that favor water-intensive crops such as rice, and a move away from unrealistic full agricultural self-sufficiency. Reallocating water away from heavy, state-connected industries toward municipal and agricultural needs, and cutting wasteful state spending on foreign proxies and regional military adventures would also free resources for relief. But these measures confront entrenched beneficiaries, contractors, military-industrial interests, and local elites who profit from the existing system. Finally, despite the scale of the water emergency, Tehran continues to prioritize strategic and military investments, including plans to rebuild nuclear research infrastructure damaged in recent strikes. Public comment from senior officials has focused more on strategic resilience than on concrete, immediate measures to halt aquifer depletion and secure urban water supplies.